they started joking with us, asking us how the gig went and saying, I bet you'd rather be at home than be here. You'd rather be at home in bed. So we obviously joking with them. And Brian McCoy, who was the trumpet player, singer in the band, nudged me and said, don't worry, Steve. He said, this is an army checkpoint.
But it wasn't. It was the UVF masquerading as soldiers. 2 of them planted a bomb in the back of the show band's van. It seems they intended it to explode across the border so the world would think the band were terrorists.
The bomb went off when they closed the back of the personnel van and instantly killed the 2 guys that were standing at the van. One of them had just pushed me.
The explosion threw Stephen Travers in the air. The UVF then shot him with dum-dum bullets. They exploded inside him, shattering into 13 pieces.
The next thing I remember was I could hear Fran O'Toole and I think Tony Garrity, who was my best friend in the band. We were very close. He was the lead guitarist, crying, saying, please don't shoot me, don't kill me. And then I heard the gunfire, so they killed them, obviously. I was told later that they, as I say, Fran was the good-looking lead singer, and they shot him 22 times in the face.
Two of the UVF men arrested for the massacre were soldiers of the Ulster Defence Regiment, part of the British Army. They were sentenced to life in the compounds of Long Kesh. Once inside, they joined other Loyalists who regarded themselves as prisoners of war and acted just like them. This remarkable film was secretly shot by the UDA and smuggled out of the prison. Parades and inspections like this were routine. UVF prisoners did the same under the command of Gusty Spence.
It was all known British Army lines. There was a regime, a regiment, that Reveille was 8 o'clock in the morning, a 5-mile run or a 3-mile run, depending on the weather. And then showers, breakfast, muster parade, and then the day was laid out.
When I first met him, I marched into his makeshift office, if you like. He's dressed totally in black with a Sam Brown and a belt and a cap comforter, and he is, I have to say, he's a figure of authority. He's charismatic.
Spence knew that Loyalist prisoners had one fatal flaw. They knew all about guns and bombs, but nothing about history and politics.
What I wanted to do was to provoke them into thinking about why they were there, not the offence. The offence was only the manifestation of why they were there. I wanted to know the reasons why they were there.
I think what happened to me was someone unlocked the door, pushed it slightly ajar, and gave me the offer to walk through the door or not walk through the door, as was my choice. And the person who unlocked the door was none other than Gusty Spence, who, when I arrived in Long Kesh, said to me, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, possession of explosives." And he says, "No, no, 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 no. Why are you here?" And I thought, arrogant bastard, not defending my people. But it was a question, I think, that caused me some concern, because I don't know that I'd thought very long about why I was doing what I was doing and why I subsequently ended up in jail.
Long Kesh became the Loyalist University, and David Irvine one of its graduates. In these classrooms sat the men who, almost 20 years later, became the new Loyalist politicians. They encouraged the paramilitaries on the road to peace.
We had to give people a grasp of our history. They didn't really have a clue initially.
They hadn't a clue why they were there?
No, they had, in political terms, no, they were absolutely ignorant.
What effect did prison have on you? Did it change you?
I think there's no road to Damascus conversion from paramilitarism to politics, but I think that the beginning of the analysis was as good for me as anything that's ever happened to me in my life. I don't advocate prison for reflection, but it's certainly the place to do it.
But outside the prison, on the raw streets of the Shankill, the rhetoric of soldiers fighting a war often cloaked naked sectarianism and blind hatred. A gang known as the Shankill Butchers epitomised that reality. They were members of a UVF platoon who abducted Catholics at random and literally carved them up with butcher's knives. When families identified the victims, it was a moment of unimaginable horror.
It was a very harrowing experience, and something that I'll, probably never forget. I looked at this sight that was before me, and the physical state of the body, the injuries, stab wounds, his head was caved in, his face was just striped with massive cuts that had been stitched. His throat had been cut. He'd been stabbed in various places all over the body. There was hatchet and hammer wounds on the legs and thighs. And I was just standing there scanning this and trying to sort of come to terms with this thing that was in front of me.
And it was your father?
Yeah.
The orgy of killing began with a robbery at a wine warehouse in which 3 Catholics were shot dead. One member of the UVF platoon to which the butchers belonged was questioned about the robbery. He was never charged and was never one of their gang.
I regarded them as decent bunch of lads. Now, like everything else in life, there are maybe 1 or 2 out of that group who would have found their way into prison anyway. But I would say 70% to 80% of those charged with the Shankill Butchers would probably went through life without even being in prison themselves.
But how can you call them a decent bunch of lads when they committed the horrendous crimes that they did?
I still found them a decent bunch of lads. I knew them not as people who were monsters. I knew them as human beings.
They carved people up, tortured them, slaughtered them. Decent bunch of lads?
Well, in every bunch of lads, you'll have ones who are the leaders and ones who are led, and quite a few of them are led. And they remain to this day decent fellows.
Gorman MacMullen was later charged with armed robbery and sentenced to 6 years. For months, whilst the gang stalked the streets, Catholics were terrified to venture out. When the butchers were finally caught, they were convicted of 19 murders and sentenced to 2,000 years. But the families of their victims are still imprisoned by the memory.
In my opinion, when his heart stopped beating and his pulse stopped, he was no longer a victim. It was then that me and my family became the victims, and are still the victims, some 23 years later.